What up, leaders? Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about money. I want to talk about how to invest the oil wealth that Guyana is about to receive. And this is the beginning of 2020. Today is January 4th, 2020, and I want to welcome you back to this channel. Welcome back, Rafaelitos subscribers, and if you're new to this channel, welcome to Rafael Nation. Happy New Year, Happy New Decade, and I hope this decade brings you the kind of prosperity we're expecting in Guyana. But let's talk about money. We want to talk about why the Guyana Sovereign Wealth Fund must be invested locally in Guyana and not in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and what should happen, what should be done with the first set of money coming in from oil into Guyana in 2020. So stay tuned. So today is the official launch of the political season in Guyana. The coalition government has just started their campaign last evening, and most of the other political parties have started campaigning several months ago. We now have 19 political parties contesting this election cycle on March 2nd, 2020. But today what I want to do is I want to talk to us about money, about the real reason why there are so many political parties campaigning, and the real reason behind this campaign season. That is oil, right? So we're going to be hearing a lot about how the political parties plan to spend the oil wealth. What I want to do in this video is to explain to you what really should happen, what we should be doing with our money from oil in 2020. So stay tuned.
Oh, this is my day. I'm ready to take it on, come what may.
So there are four things we want to talk about in this episode, and the first one has to do with what the government has declared already, is that they're going to put the Sovereign Wealth Fund in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So one of the things that the ruling coalition government announced late last year is that they have decided that instead of hosting Guyana's Sovereign Wealth Fund in the Bank of Guyana, they are going to deposit that money, that is the money from oil, the earnings from oil, into the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And this is why I think that is a bad idea, right? So the first thing is that it is a bad idea for Guyana to deposit our Sovereign Wealth Fund in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, because it puts us at risk, particularly if our relationship with the United States turns sour and they decide to impose sanctions. You know that the politics of Washington changes with each political cycle, and whoever is in charge, in power, in the presidency, might decide to direct American foreign policy in ways that are different from what the previous government did. And what is happening right now is a classic example. Iran, for example, is being hit with sanctions by the current administration in Washington, which is a complete 180 departure from what the previous administration had done with Iran. They had established a treaty and an agreement on how to manage nuclear weapons in Iran. You know, they had come to an agreement, a nuclear weapons agreement. The current administration completely tore up that agreement and decided to reimpose sanctions. And the problem with Guyana putting its wealth in New York, in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, is that we expose ourselves to the risk that foreign policy turns against us at some point. You know, previously the Americans had frozen assets, the Iranian assets, oil money in their accounts, Sovereign Wealth Fund in America. And then, of course, the last administration returned some of that money, or most of that money, to Iran. And now the present government has turned against Iran, and now we're looking at the possibility of war with Iran. So the point is that we don't want to expose ourselves to this kind of uncertainty, this kind of risk where American foreign policy can turn against us. So the very first thing we need to do is to make sure that we don't put our assets in the hands of the Americans. So it is a bad idea for for Guyana to put its sovereign wealth fund in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That's number one. The second reason is that we actually need that money here in Guyana. We have interest rates in Guyana. Bank interest rates in Guyana are around 18%, 16 to 18%. That means that if you want a bank loan to start a business or a mortgage for a house, you are expected to pay interest rates in the vicinity of 16 to 18%, depending on the amount of money you want to borrow and what you want to do with that money. And that is for all of the local banks, including, in fact, the foreign banks. Interest rates are very high, but the only reason why these interest rates, there is no reason why these interest rates should be this high, because inflation is low. Inflation in Guyana is still very low, below 2%, but interest rates are very high, around 18%. And that disparity needs to be eliminated, needs to be corrected, because interest rates usually track with inflation. So we need the money in Guyana, that is our sovereign wealth fund, needs to be invested in our local banks, firstly, to bring down the interest rates. In other words, we should capitalize our banks, make sure that that money is loaned to local banks so that the banks can now lend that money to borrowers, and so that this serves as cash inflow, capital inflow into the society, not by printing money, which is what drives up inflation. Okay, so the third thing that should happen is we need to invest in the economy. We need to stimulate the economy, to create an economic stimulus. And the way to do that is to invest in universal basic income. So there's a lot of talk in Guyana about whether, in fact, we should be giving $5,000 to each household or each individual citizen in Guyana as a result of the wealth coming in from oil. And I support that. So I want to go on record saying that I support universal basic income. We will be stimulating the economy, because when you give poor people money, they spend it immediately. They go to the supermarkets, they go to the grocery stores, and they buy food. So that money gets into the economy, circulates, it creates demand, it drives demand for food, for basic food stuff, and that will cause the demand for local produce to go up and cause farmers to produce more, and that money causes the economy to grow, the basic economy to grow. So that is the third thing that should happen. We should allow a portion of that money to go into universal basic income. And the fourth thing that should happen is, so number 4, right? The fourth thing that should happen to the money that comes into oil, from oil sales to Guyana in 2020, should be, we should support the rise in the value of the Guyana dollar. I've done a video before, a previous video before. I'm going to put a link to that video here. It said that the value of Guyana dollar will rise after March 1, 2020. And of course, I explained in that video why the value of the Guyana dollar should be allowed to rise, because of the influx of US dollars coming in from the sale of oil. And I'm saying here again that the fourth thing that should be done, and should be allowed to happen when the money comes in from oil in 2020, is we should see a slow rise in the value of the Guyana dollar if that money is kept in Guyana and allowed to circulate in the economy in the ways I described. 1, it must be put into the banks to capitalize the banks. 2, it must be given back to the people so that some of that money relieves suffering at the poverty level, the people below the poverty level, and everybody should benefit from it, so that everybody feels as if they're benefiting from it. And if you allow the value of the Guyana dollar to rise, that is another way in which the money, that is the impact of oil, will reach every citizen, because everybody who holds Guyana dollars will now have greater earning power. So here is how that happens. Guyana will receive the first tranche, the first lift of oil on February 22nd, 2020. In other words, I explained in the previous video the lift schedule, and you can find a link to that video here, where I share how Guyana gets 6 million barrels of oil in 2020, and how that 6 million barrels of oil plus a 2% royalty translates to about $400 million in income, in revenue, in profits for Guyana in 2020. That $400 million in revenue coming directly into Guyana from the sale of oil should be allowed to impact the Guyana dollar, that is to support the value of the Guyana dollar rising. And the way to do that is by allowing all those three previous things to happen. That is, the value of the Guyana dollar will rise if we keep inflation low, if we allow the US dollars to be used to capitalize our banks, and if we allow the US dollars to be stored locally in the Bank of Guyana and managed by the Bank of Guyana instead of depositing that money in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So that is what we should be doing with our money in 2020. Now, here's a chance for you to tell me what you think should happen to the first quantity of cash flowing into the economy, flowing into the Guyanese economy in 2020. And the reason why I'm addressing this is because, like I said, this is the basis for the campaigns, the political campaigns in 2020. This is why everybody is joining the political fray. This is why we have 19 political parties contesting these elections. And the reason why we want to talk about this is that at the end of the day, this is why they're all there. They're talking about how the money should be spent. And if you express your views, at least at this level, we can let people know where we think our money should be going and not have political parties coming imposing these ideas about putting our money in the Federal Reserve Bank for 3% interest when we should be investing it locally in Guyana. Tell me what you think about investing our financial returns from oil in Guyana, supporting the rise in value of the Guyana dollar, and capitalizing the banks, keeping our interest rates low and our inflation rates low, and giving back so that Guyanese can benefit from a universal basic income. Leave a comment below. Remember, you can support this channel on Patreon and PayPal. Share this video with friends and family around the world. Let them know what's happening in Guyana. Support this family on Patreon and Patreon. Share this video with friends and family around the world. Like and subscribe. Let people know what's happening in Georgetown, Guyana. Later!